What if the sweetest, most agreeable parts of you, the polite smile, the eager nod, the automatic "sure, no problem," aren't kindness at all, but camouflage? Imagine discovering that every time you smooth things over, you're quietly sandpapering away the edges that make you unmistakably you. Carl Jung warned that this polished persona becomes a prison the moment you mistake it for your real face. Yet most of us tighten the straps on that mask every single day without noticing the skin beneath turning numb. After all, being liked feels safe, right? You trade a tiny piece of honesty for a rush of approval, and the bargain seems harmless. Until the day you wake up and realize you've bartered away so many pieces that your own reflection feels like a stranger. Think about it. How often do you say yes because no feels like conflict, because silence seems rude, because some primitive part of your brain still believes rejection equals danger? That reflex didn't start yesterday. It was soldered into you during childhood, when survival meant pleasing parents, teachers, or playground tyrants. But survival strategies have an ugly habit of overstaying their welcome. In adulthood, the same reflex that once protected you now keeps you half alive, drifting through conversations where you're praised for being easy and accommodating, while a quieter voice inside wonders how much longer you can hold your breath. People mistake that quiet ache for shyness, burnout, maybe even depression, but it's something simpler and more alarming: self-erasure. Jung called it betrayal of the self, and he believed the real danger isn't that others will take advantage of you, though they will, but that you'll eventually forget there was ever a you worth protecting. So before we unpack how childhood wiring forged this mask, and how modern algorithms tighten it, pause and ask yourself one question. When was the last time you said no without apology and felt the ground hold you steady instead of swallowing you whole? Because that single, unapologetic no might be the first crack of daylight bursting through the seams of your carefully crafted disguise. They say being the nice person wins you respect, but look at what really happens. The more you say yes, the more you fade away. You give out friendly smiles like free samples, and people keep coming back for more until you're nothing but an empty tray. In a recent survey, almost 2/3 of young adults admitted they find it hard to say no. The more you try to keep everyone happy, the more invisible and unimportant you feel. Meanwhile, people keep telling you how easygoing you are, while inside you feel worn out. Every time you agree to something, you send the message that your time doesn't matter and your boundaries don't count. Over weeks and months, that clash between what you do and how you feel doesn't go away. It turns into constant tiredness, low mood, and stress. You're not tired because you're busy. You're tired because the real you is locked behind a wall of yes. Here's the hard truth. People who benefit from your constant compliance don't call it using you. They call it handy. They praise your good nature until the moment you finally refuse, and then they act surprised or upset. That's the cost of being invisible. It's free for them, but it wears you down like water wearing a weighted stone. At first, you don't notice. You think one more yes will keep the peace. But every time you give in, you erase a bit more of who you really are. So ask yourself, do you want to be known as the nice person, or do you want a life that fits who you truly are? Masks don't bring real peace. They only hide the cracks. And the longer you keep pretending, the harder it is to remember how to speak up for yourself. Your brain has a built-in alarm system that's been on guard since you were a child. When danger showed up, whether it was a shouting match at home, a mean kid on the playground, or a teacher's harsh words, you learned fast. Survival meant pleasing. Psychologists call this the fawn response, a fourth option alongside fight, flight, and freeze. Instead of fighting back, running away, or shutting down, you learn to charm, agree, and comply. Imagine a young child in a tense household. Every time the parent's voice rose, the child rushed in with a hug or a joke, desperate to smooth things over. That child didn't fully understand the anger or the fear. They only knew that smiling meant safety. Over time, that quick, "I'm sorry," or eager, "let me help," formed a habit deep in the nervous system. It was a lifesaver back then, and now it's a trap. In today's world, you might not face yelling or threats, but the wiring remains the same. Every yes you give when you want to say no is another hit of that old survival drug. It calms the inner alarm, just like it did in childhood, but it also strengthens the path of least resistance, compliance. You start to believe that keeping things smooth is the only way to stay safe, even when there's no real danger. That habit shows up everywhere. At work, you take on extra tasks to avoid conflict. In friendships, you say, "sure," even when you're exhausted. In family gatherings, you stay quiet so no one gets upset. Each time the alarm inside you buzzes, the fawn reflex kicks in before you even have a chance to think. And every time you fawn, you teach yourself that your wants, your energy, and your limits don't matter. The real cost, your sense of self, gets buried. The child who learned to please is now an adult who doesn't know how to disagree, doesn't trust their own choices, and can't sense where they end and others begin. But awareness is the first step out of this loop. Once you spot the fawn response in action, your quick nod, eager agreement, sudden guilt, you can pause. You can choose, bit by bit, to stay true to what you really feel, instead of what you think will keep everyone happy. That pause is powerful. It cracks open the old survival pattern and gives you a glimpse of who you might be without it. You've probably come across advice books or guided journals that promise to help you do shadow work, to uncover the hidden parts of yourself you've been ignoring. The idea sounds powerful. Sit down, write out times you held back your anger or hid your pride, and then transform those buried feelings into self-knowledge. But in many of these DIY exercises, you end up simply replaying old emotions without any clear way forward. You might feel a brief rush when you name a memory or admit a secret thought, but without deeper guidance, that moment often fades into confusion or even more self-doubt. True shadow integration, as Jung described it, isn't a one-off worksheet or a quick journaling prompt. It's a process that asks you to lean into discomfort, face parts of yourself you've been taught to reject, and then learn how to channel those impulses in healthy ways. That usually takes a trusted guide, a therapist, a coach, a mentor, who can help you see where your judgments and defenses come from and offer strategies to own those parts without letting them run wild. Otherwise, you risk getting stuck in a loop of guilt, writing down your flaws, feeling bad about them, then closing the notebook and doing nothing different. Jung taught that every quality you deny, anger, envy, selfishness, pride, hides a potential gift. Anger, for example, can become a force for setting boundaries. Envy can point you toward what you truly value. Pride can fuel confidence instead of arrogance. But discovering those gifts is more like an apprenticeship than a class. You need practice, feedback, and honest reflection over time. You don't just label your shadow, you learn to listen to it, understand what it's trying to show you, and then decide how to respond with integrity. So before you pick up the next workbook, ask yourself, am I looking for a quick fix, or am I prepared for a deeper journey? Real growth isn't convenient. It's messy and slow, but it leads to genuine freedom. Carl Jung wasn't just a wise guide on the hidden parts of our minds, he was also a man with his own shadows. In the 1930s, he lived in Germany as political tension was rising. At first, he hoped his ideas could bridge divides, but some of his writings and lectures came across as unwilling to condemn the new regime outright. Critics pointed to passages where he seemed to praise order and tradition, and for years people wondered whether he'd slipped into support for dangerous ideas. Later, Jung looked back and admitted mistakes. In letters from the mid-1930s, he expressed regret for any words that sounded like approval of anti-Jewish policies. He insisted he never meant to endorse hatred, but rather wanted to study the human urge to belong and follow authority. Still, the damage was done. Even a thinker devoted to self-knowledge can be swayed by fear of conflict or desire for acceptance. His early missteps became a real-world example of the risks we all face when we cling too tightly to a comfortable mask. That controversy shows an important truth. Nobody's immune to the pressure to fit in. Jung's quest for balance between order and freedom was genuine. But by underestimating how his words could be used by those in power, he found himself wearing a mask he didn't fully control. It reminds us that the persona isn't a harmless costume we can slip on and off at will. It can grow so natural that even the person wearing it starts to believe it's who they really are. Understanding Jung's personal struggle helps us see why individuation, becoming our whole true selves, is so urgent. If a pioneer of depth psychology could lose his way, imagine how easily the rest of us might trade honesty for acceptance, no matter how well-intentioned our reasons. His story isn't here to shame him, but to warn us. Everyone is at risk of forgetting their own voice under the weight of external expectations. Next, we'll look at how modern life piles on that pressure, creating new kinds of masks and new traps for our true selves. Today, in every part of our lives, from a demanding job to a packed family dinner, we slip into familiar roles. The reliable colleague, the peacemaker, the go-to friend. These modern masks feel safe. They smooth over tension, earn us praise, and keep us in the club. But the cost is burnout, fatigue that no weekend can cure, that tight knot between your shoulder blades, that voice in your head asking, "Who am I beneath all these masks?" When your worth depends on fitting into every role, you lose sight of where one mask ends and the next begins. And worst of all, you lose sight of yourself. That restless ache, that sense of hollowness after a day spent managing other people's needs, isn't weakness. It's a sign your real self is being squeezed out by habit. You start to show up at meetings or family gatherings with a practiced smile, thinking you're being kind, only to end the day feeling unseen and raw. You feel tense calling in sick because you've never said no to a project, or guilty leaving a party early because you're afraid they'll think you rude. Every forced yes rewrites your brain's survival manual, teaching it that your comfort and desires don't matter. But here's the good news. Modern life's pressure also offers modern tools for change. Awareness is your first act of rebellion. The next is a single, solid boundary. A no, spoken without guilt. A pause before you agree. A moment's stillness before you say, sure. Those tiny breaks in routine crack open the old survival wiring and remind your nervous system that you're worthy, even when you disappoint someone. We began this journey under that first bright question. When was the last time you said no and felt safe? And we've traced the path from childhood fawning to DIY shadow work, to even Jung's own missteps with conformity. Now, you stand at the edge of true individuation, the freedom to choose authenticity over ease, integrity over approval. It won't be tidy, it may feel uncomfortable, but with each boundary you hold, each honest word you speak, you rebuild the life that belongs to you, not the one other people designed. So here's your closing challenge. What mask will you set aside today? What small no will you utter just for yourself? Because the only mask worth wearing is the one that lets you breathe. And that begins the moment you choose to be real. If you found this journey from people-pleasing to true freedom eye-opening, Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an awakening moment. Drop a comment below. What's the first no you'll practice this week? Let's support each other on the path to authenticity.